Stellar Blade is a game with a lot of flash, pizzazz, but its combat loop is surprisingly in-depth and complex. And you may not pick everything up on your first try, or just understand it all really. This type of game could be new and scary or familiar, but just feature-dense and kinda hard to sift through. So hey, don't worry, welcome to a new series on the channel, a Jabroni's Guide to Stellar Blade. In this series, I go over my guide or my tips to conquer an in-game challenge or a game on the whole, and today we're gonna focus on understanding the combat loop of Stellar Blade, because it is extremely similar to Sekiro, yet different in certain key ways. Let's start with the differences. Various combos, these are your bread and butter of the combat, and you can unlock more skills, well duh, but more combos in the skill tree. And the way you perform them is by, well, comboing between your regular and your strong attacks, with square and triangle respectively. But these aren't the only kits in your repertoire. You have something called beta skills. These are kind of your big signature abilities that require you to spend a gauge that you build up in combat. And in the demo, it presented an extra fight after you beat the story part of the demo, against a boss called the Stalker. The Stalker fight takes a little bit further into the game, so they give you some extra goodies to go alongside it. And the beta skills available to you, essentially, were 4 abilities. You had a melee single target attack, you had a melee AoE attack, area of effect, for attacking multiple enemies. You had, on your circle button, ranged blade slash attacks. Think Bleach Getsuka Tensho's kind of. Or like any kind of like blade beam. If you played Nier Automata, the shockwave, kind of like that. And you also had a kick that, while it didn't do much damage, it would interrupt the enemy, or at least Stalker. Each of these abilities kind of slots into its own style of utility. If you're fighting a singular boss, chances are you want to use the ability that's going to mess up the boss itself, but if you're surrounded by enemies, so go for the melee AoE. So that's kind of your bread and butter for your offense. I mean, you also get a gun later on in the game, so there's that. We'll talk about the gun in a second, though. Now, let's focus in on the defense aspect of the game, where the game really shines, in my opinion, and feels very reminiscent to Sekiro Shadows Die Twice. Because the gameplay is, in my opinion, reactive-based gameplay, where the flow of combat is not necessarily decided by you, but by the enemy, and you are trying to react to what the boss does to find openings and exploit them. There's a heavy reliance on parrying and dodging, and if you get the timing just right, you can perfect parry or, well, perfect dodge. Parrying, though, seems to be the bread and butter, at least that's the playstyle I elected to go down. When you press the parry button with L1, I believe it's L1, there's a slight animation delay between pressing the actual parry button and the parry going off because Eve has to get the sword in position. This can throw people off because you have to adjust for that timing. You can't just wait for the attack to be half a pixel away from you and then press the button because you won't have enough time to raise your sword. And a lot of the time in a game like this, parrying just one attack is not going to cut it. You have to continue to parry throughout the duration of the enemy's combo. Don't feel discouraged if you can't get every single one of them. It's a learning curve, right? And you'll probably tend to find that as you continue progressing through the game, you'll just get the hang of parrying more and more and more. You may not nail it every time, but the amount of times you hit it versus you don't hit it will start to change. And when you get into that flow of things, it feels super good and satisfying. That's one of the brilliant things about a combat system like this. When you start to do good, the game feels all the better for it. It's also important to note that not all attacks can be parried. And funnily enough, dodging in this game has quite a bit of nuance to it. And there's a few kinds. You have your regular dodging with the circle button, and honestly, that's one just kind of goes down to timing it. However, there's a couple of different types of dodges. If you see an enemy glow yellow, I tend to find that the best solution for that is to simply dodge it. There might be another way to tackle this, but I tend to find dodging those attacks just to be, well, the safest play. But if you get a blue glow from an enemy's attack, well, what you're gonna want to do is wait for the sword to glow blue. This tripped me up for a bit, but they even say it in the tutorial for this mechanic, you have to wait for the sword to glow blue. And it may take a second depending on the specific animation you're confronting. And then what you're gonna want to do is move directly towards the enemy, or the boss, and you want to dodge as well. If you time this right, it will cause you to teleport behind them and allow you to counterattack them. However, if the enemy glows pink here, what you're gonna want to do is dodge backwards. Dodging towards the boss will not work here, at least in my experience. So there's a few things to keep on the lookout for when enemies are doing their attacks, because you want to be on the lookout for this. What attacks do you believe that you can parry, and should you parry them? What attacks should be dodged? What attacks have that purple glow or the pink glow? The glows are really obvious. It's just it's not pattern recognition. It's just reaction timing at that point. If you see blue, you have to say in your mind, wait for the sword and then go into the enemy and dodge. That's your timing window. It can be a lot to take in at first, but if you're a veteran of these kinds of games, you will probably pick it up quickly. And if not, well, practice makes perfect after all, and the game gives you a bevy of other tools to utilize in your playthrough, so you can still make some progress. Speaking of other tools, the freaking gun. So you can't use this thing in most of the demo, at least from what I played, but in that extra boss fight, yeah, you get a gun, and it's like 30 rounds of ammunition. I imagine you can augment that, but holy mother of God, this thing shreds the enemy shields. So if you're at a distance and you just want to shred a little bit of the shield before you go back in, pop out your gun real quick, fire into them, and Bob's your uncle. Now, maybe this is in the options menu, but I didn't see it. When I put the gun away, my auto lock-on or my lock-on the enemy would drop as well, so I'd have to reapply that. That's just something to be on the lookout for. It can get kind of annoying in the heat of the moment, but just be on the lookout for that. Okay, so we've gone over how to actually attack in the game, and we've gone over how to defend yourself. Mostly. Well, what about the enemies? They have 3 gauges, basically. HP, their health, duh. But they also have 2 other gauges, shields and the stagger gauge. But I tended to find that if I broke the enemy shield, at least on the boss fight Stalker, it would then at some point trigger a QTE where I could, well, do a bit of damage to the enemy. But the big gauge to be on the lookout for, and where this game kind of falls in line with Sekiro yet again, is the stagger gauge. You can reduce it in a couple of ways, but the main way and the most consistent way to do this is through parrying. There is a large emphasis on parrying in this game. You don't technically need to do it, but it's kind of one of those wink wink nudge nudge, maybe you want to invest in parrying. And the way to reduce the stagger gauge is by landing those parries. You land enough of them and eventually that gauge will go. And once that gauge is gone, congratulations, you may be in the mood for a big finishing attack that'll either just kill them or do significant damage. This one can be kind of hard to miss because the enemy will essentially like crumple down, and you'll get a giant pop-up if you're close enough to the enemy saying like, hey, annihilate them! And this is powerful. We're talking significant chunks of boss fights' health, or I'm pretty sure just one taps regular enemies, at least most of the time. Stellar Blade's all about managing all these different aspects of each fight to put yourself in a better position to out-sustain the enemy. Reading their combos, reading their moveset, learning when to dodge, when to parry, when to be aggressive, when to go in and try to reduce their HP with regular combos. Oh, I have these beta skills available, how can I utilize this to my advantage? Oh, because of the nature of the fight, I'm at a distance here. Do I want to move in by holding the triangle button down and making a lot of ground up that way? Or do I want to lean back for a bit and just lay into them with my gun? Or do I want to make use of the consumables and items at my disposal? This, in my opinion, is one of the least talked about aspects of Stellar Blade that could end up being one of the best, or at least one of the coolest. You get a swath of consumables and items in this game. You have your healing potions, which operate in a similar way to the Estus Flask system, where essentially you have limited uses, but you can refresh them at camp. Very basic stuff here. But in that extra fight against Stalker, I had extras. I had a big heal, I had a smaller heal, I had heal over time, stuff like that. And you also get offensive items like landmines that you can get the enemy to walk over. You have shock grenades or just grenades overall that may specialize in doing something to the enemy, not just doing damage. I'm pretty sure those shock grenades from before that I just mentioned, what they do is they make the enemy fall over and essentially crumble for a bit. That can be extremely powerful. You have a lot of tools in your kit to take down tougher enemies other than just hitting parries and dodges. You have a lot of supplementation to that. And maybe you're kind of bad at one mechanic, or you're just in a position where you're like, I don't want to deal with this right now. You can either get good or use a grenade that basically stops the attack from happening so you can get a bit of a breather, or just go in for a couple of attacks. In terms of customization, there's skill trees, upgrading stuff like dodge and parry to make them easier, or to give you counterattacks, or more combos, or just cool stuff. And what this does is allow you to kind of invest in your preferred playstyle. I like parrying, so I invested more so into parrying than I did into dodging, such as making perfect parrying easier, essentially widening the window of having to land that parry. But you can also invest in developing counterattacks after hitting those perfect parries, sometimes, or those dodges. And from the sounds of it, there's a lot of other abilities coming down the pipe as well in the game, but those are largely the basics. Stellar Blade, at least in my experience and from my play session, seemed to be a reactive-based game where you are going to be focusing in on the enemies and what they're doing and how you can react to them. You are not necessarily the one dictating the pace of combat, the enemy is. And it's a combat system extremely reminiscent to Sekiro. It's not the same exactly, but the bones of it are very, very similar. And I wouldn't say that I'm like the best player out in the world. I wouldn't even say I'm like that much above average. These are the kinds of games where you're gonna start out and you're gonna suck at it, and you're gonna really suck at it. And it may feel bad at first, but if you stick with it and you decide, I'm gonna get better at this, you learn how to parry, you learn the rhythm of the game, then all of a sudden it may fall in line for you. And when it started to do that for me is when I really fell in love with the combat loop for Stellar Blade. It's pretty in-depth, fun, interesting, and customizable, but there is a lot to it. So sometimes it's nice to just take a step back and analyze the basics. And I hope that this guide was of some help to you all out there. But with that, I think I'll call the video there for the day. Thank you all for tuning in. My pleasure having the video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out and helps support future content, and I greatly appreciate it. And leave a comment down below with your thoughts, your opinions, and your own personal tips and tricks for Stellar Blade. I mainly only wanted to go over the extreme basics in this video. For about a 40-minute demo, for a 40 or an hour-minute demo, 40 to 60-minute demo, I played it for about 3 hours on stream, and I fell in love with it. I just kept playing it and fighting Stalker because it was so fun and interesting, and I wanted to get good at it. And I tend to find that when a game is so good that it makes you want to get better at it, that's a really good sign even for a demo. Thank you all for tuning in. Stay safe, have a great day, go play some video games if you can, and as always, I'll see you all next time. Bye bye everybody, until we meet again.